So you take the George Foreman grill. George Foreman did not invent that grill. He didn't make it. He's probably never been to the factory that does make it. That's in China. What George did was he licensed his name and his image to that company.
Just to kind of get started, will you give a little background on what Licensing Lab is and what you do now?
So almost anything that a business owns is an asset that can be licensed, whether that's a physical product, a training program, a service, intellectual property, such as, say their business systems they've developed, marketing systems. All of those things are licensable assets. And most companies don't realize that. So I help companies take the assets that they already have and turn them into new 6- and 7-figure profit centers. And then I also do more traditional type of licensing, like developing products for large corporations and then licensing them out to those corporations, things like toys, software. I even did an insurance product.
Nice.
Even though I know nothing about the insurance industry. And it all comes down to that common denominator that any asset can be licensed.
So just for everybody that's listening, so they're clear, what is licensing exactly?
Licensing is really pretty simple. It's paying for the use of something. You don't own it, you use it. And a good example is, say, the mailing list software. Doesn't matter if you're on Infusionsoft or Aweber, Constant Contact, whatever it is, you don't own that software. You pay a fee monthly to use it, and that's a license.
So Microsoft, so anybody that's using that or...
Right. So if you stop paying that fee, you no longer have use of it. Now you have your list. They don't own your list.
Right.
So, but you're paying for the ability to communicate with the list.
And do you have any kind of famous examples of licensing that maybe you've seen out in the market that people would be able to kind of relate to before we dive into the details of it?
Okay, so you take the George Foreman grill. George Foreman did not invent that grill. He didn't make it. He's probably never been to the factory that does make it. That's in China. What George did was he licensed his name and his image to that company. They pay him a fee. Now, I don't know, that fee can be structured differently. It can be an annual fee, or it can be based on how many units are sold, which would be a royalty. And it may be a combination of those, a fee plus a royalty.
So he licensed his name.
Right. He licensed,
and eventually got paid a couple $100 million, right?
Yeah.
So what they did at the end of that, for anybody that is listening, so there was this little cookie grill thing that was a gadget that you basically is like a waffle iron that you put hamburgers and meat and stuff in, you close it, it sizzles them, cooks them, and then drains the fat out. And George Foreman, former boxer guy, world champion, endorsed it, and for some reason it just took off like crazy, right?
Exactly.
Sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth of stuff. And then ultimately it started as a license where he licensed his name. He acted as a spokesperson for the grill. And then ultimately it was so profitable that the people who had entered into the license with Foreman said, we'd like to just buy the right to be able to use in perpetuity this. And so that's another form of license. It's just a license in perpetuity for a flat fee.
Exactly.
And it was a couple $100 million, right? They paid.
I wasn't aware of that aspect of it. So that's cool. Yeah.
Okay.
Same thing happened with Tony Hawk. He licensed his name and image to EA Sports, and it was actually Sony before then, for their game Tony Hawk Underground. And then eventually he was making so much money in royalties that they said, we'd like to buy you out. And the figure I heard, and this goes back 15 years ago, was a $25 million buyout.
It was initially $500,000.
Yeah.
And he went to his advisors and said, is this a good deal? And they were like, no, I don't think I would do it. And he said he was very happy that he got that advice and that he needed the money. Really, do you remember that? He really needed the money because we talked to him about it and he told that story.
Yeah.
And he's like, man, if I had done that, it would have just been
Wow, I wasn't aware of that.
so bad. And he's like, I really needed the money at the time, but it was kind of cool. That's a great example.
Yeah.
And I want to hear, because you did a deal with him on a product, I think, right?
Actually, I did a deal with a toy company that had a deal with him for his image. And that's another advantage to licensing. So this is kind of a cool tangent.
Okay.
When you license something to a company, you, other than maybe developing a cheap, crude prototype like I did for $31, you don't have any cost. So I took a toy skateboard that already existed, and this company that made them, they had licenses with Tony and 6 other big skateboarding brands to put their images on the toy skateboards. So I developed a little add-on that went on to the board that made it more fun for the kids. Basically, it was a little piece that had a piece of flint in it, and when they dragged the tail, it would shoot off a big ball of sparks.
Right.
And it was called Firefoot.
Yeah.
But the cool thing
That was
is,
super popular for a while. I
yeah,
remember seeing a lot
it
of videos.
was. It was real
Yeah.
popular. It was fun, and it was very cool. You know, you walk in at that time, Toys R Us was the big toy store, or you go in there, or Walmart, or Target, and there's a wall full of your toy there. It's
cool.
fun to see.
Yeah.
So, but the interesting thing is, when I licensed that, I got a fairly small fee and a royalty, but I had no cost. So they spent, I think it was about $1.25 million in manufacturing and another $1.5 million to $2 million in advertising.
Right.
I had none of that expense.
Right.
I also didn't have any of the expense of them sending their engineers to China to build the molds and everything else in the production. I had none of the costs of shipping. I didn't have to get distribution all over the world like they had. So you essentially have, I mean, this company at the time, they were a fairly small toy company. They were doing maybe $150 million a year in sales, which is small for a company that size. But really, I had the use of, maybe $20 million in assets that I didn't pay a penny for. And I didn't have any of the risk.
Yeah.
If the toy flopped, that $2.5 million they had invested was out of their pocket, not mine. So that's one of the real benefits to licensing.